The envelope was already open when I found it. Sitting on the kitchen counter, slit clean along the top like someone had run a letter opener through it with patience and intention. The name on the front was mine, Celeste Adrian Morrow, written in my father's handwriting, the particular way he looped the C that I'd spent years trying to forget and never quite could. The postmark was dated 3 months before he died. And I had never seen this envelope before in my life. I stood there in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, the house I had just purchased, 48 hours ago, in full, and I held that already opened letter in my hands, and I thought about all the things that had been taken from me before I ever knew they were mine. This is the story of how I learned that patience is not weakness. How silence can be a form of strategy. And how the woman who threw me out of this house on a cold November morning, with 2 garbage bags and 18 years of my life stuffed inside them, ended up watching me sign the deed at the kitchen table where she once told me I didn't belong. Let me take you back to where it started. Because none of what happened at the end makes sense without understanding what it felt like to stand at the beginning. My father was a builder. Not a developer, not a contractor in the way people use that word now to mean expensive and indifferent. He was a man who built things with his hands, who drove a truck that smelled like sawdust and motor oil, who could look at a cracked foundation and tell you exactly what it needed the way a doctor reads an X-ray. His name was William Morrow, and people in Decatur, Georgia called him Mr. Will with a respect you had to earn in that town. He built this house himself. Poured the foundation on a plot of land he bought for cash, saved over 7 years, when he was 31 years old. He laid every board of the oak flooring himself. He installed the deep kitchen windows that let in that particular afternoon light, gold and sideways, the kind that makes you think of something you can't quite name. He built the porch with wide steps because he wanted his children to have somewhere to sit and watch the neighborhood and know they owned their piece of it. My mother died when I was 6. A brain aneurysm, sudden, on an ordinary Tuesday. I have almost no memory of her that doesn't feel borrowed from photographs, except one, the smell of her, warm and slightly sweet, like brown sugar and something floral underneath. I've spent 30-something years in perfume aisles trying to find it. I never have. My father grieved in the way quiet men grieve, thoroughly and in private. He kept working. He kept the house. He kept me, raised me alongside his sister, my Aunt Dottie, who came on Thursdays and Saturdays and braided my hair and made sure I got to church and told me with certainty that my mother was watching. And then, when I was 11 years old, my father met Sandra. I want to be precise about Sandra because she deserves precision. She was not a monster in the way stories like this sometimes make the stepmother into a cartoon. She was something more complicated and, in some ways, more dangerous. She was a woman who had wanted things her whole life and had learned to get them by attaching herself to people who already had them. She was charming when charm served her. She was warm in company and cold behind closed doors. She had a laugh that arrived a half second before anything was actually funny, like a reflex she'd trained herself to perform. She moved into this house 14 months after my father put a ring on her finger. She brought her own furniture and immediately began suggesting that certain things be moved, stored, replaced. My father's recliner, the one he'd had for 15 years, ended up in the garage within a year. My mother's china, the blue and white pattern that sat in the hutch in the dining room, got packed into boxes and put in the attic because, Sandra said, it didn't go with the new aesthetic she was creating. I was 12. I watched all of this and said very little and understood more than anyone gave me credit for. She never hit me. I want to say that clearly. What she did was quieter. She created an atmosphere in which I understood myself to be temporary. An inconvenience that predated her arrival and that she was tolerating with great generosity. She called it love. She used that word carefully and in public, usually when my father was in earshot. Behind his back, her eyes went flat when she looked at me, the way a person looks at a piece of furniture they intend to replace as soon as the budget allows. By the time I was 15, I had learned to stay small. I did my homework at the kitchen table before she got home from work. I kept my room immaculate because the one time it wasn't, she went through it, she told my father she was helping me organize, and things disappeared. Not dramatically. One book. A photograph. A small ceramic bird my Aunt Dottie had given me. Nothing you could point to and call theft. Just erosion. My father loved me. I believed that with every part of myself. But he had also loved Sandra in the way that some men love, completely, and at the cost of what they were able to see. She had learned which version of herself to present to him, and he had fallen in love with that version, and by the time I was old enough to try to show him what I was watching, the distance she had cultivated between us had grown too wide to cross easily. I tried, once. I was 16. I sat down with him on the porch on a Sunday afternoon and I told him, carefully, that I felt like I was disappearing in my own home. He listened. He held my hand. He said he would talk to Sandra. What happened next was that Sandra came to my room that evening and sat on the edge of my bed and explained to me, with a smile that never touched her eyes, that I was a troubled girl who was trying to destroy her marriage because I missed my mother. She said she understood. She said she forgave me. She said she hoped I would get the help I clearly needed. After that, I stopped trying to reach my father across the distance. I put my head down. I studied harder than I had ever studied. I earned a partial scholarship to a state school 2 hours away. I had a plan: get through senior year, get out, never look back. But Sandra didn't wait for me to execute the plan. The morning after my 18th birthday, a birthday that had been celebrated the night before with a store-bought cake and my father's tired eyes and Sandra's performance of a warm stepmother, I came downstairs to find 2 black garbage bags sitting by the front door. Sandra was standing in the kitchen, dressed for work, drinking coffee from the mug that said "World's Best Wife" that she had bought herself. She looked at me when I appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "I talked to your father last night. You're 18 now. It's time for you to learn to stand on your own feet." My father was not there. She told me he'd left early. A job site. I didn't know, then, whether that was true. I didn't know whether he knew. I stood at the bottom of those oak stairs my father had built and I looked at those 2 garbage bags and I felt something go very still inside me. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I had spent years preparing for exactly this, and the place inside me where the crying lived had gone quiet and resolute. I picked up both bags. I walked out the front door. The November air was cold and sharp, and the oak tree in the yard, the one my father planted the year I was born, had already dropped most of its leaves, and they were brown and pressed flat against the frost-stiffened grass. I stood on the porch for exactly 1 moment. I looked at the door. And then I walked away. What happened in the next 15 years is the part people always want to skip to the end of, because the end is where the drama lives. But the middle is where I lived, and it made me, and I won't shortchange it. I took both bags to Aunt Dottie's apartment, 20 minutes away. She opened the door, looked at me, and didn't ask a single question. She put the kettle on. She made up the couch with her good sheets. The next morning she made grits and eggs and we sat at her small kitchen table and she said, "You're going to be fine. You know that?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." It took me 3 years to finish my degree. I worked part-time at a real estate office to help cover what the scholarship didn't, and that job turned out to be the accidental foundation of everything that followed. I discovered that I had an instinct for property. For seeing what a space could become. For understanding the numbers underneath the aesthetics, what land was worth, what structures could bear, what neighborhoods were 10 years away from becoming what they were becoming. I took my real estate license at 22. I got a job with a firm in Atlanta.